So Jake, I'm not sure if you measured your hand before this. I did measure mine. It's 8 1/4. So just a 1/4 inch behind Pickett's, but that scares the hell out of me to think that he could have a 1/4 inch bigger hand and could be an NFL quarterback. But how are you doing this morning or this evening?
Well, this morning, I will tell you, I woke up in Austin, Texas, so I'm doing a heck of a lot better this evening now in Charlotte, North Carolina. No, sir, I did not measure my hand, but I know that my left hand is slightly larger than my right. So anytime if I were going to get it measured, I would definitely try to force them into measuring the left hand.
That's right.
Even though it's not my throwing hand. How much does that stink? My right hand is my dominant hand, but my left hand is larger.
So you put yourself at a disadvantage. I wonder, has it always been that way? Like, say, as you were younger, you used the right one more, so then the left one grew more? Less stress, maybe?
Hey, I do some things left-handed. Notably, brush my teeth.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's not the brush I was going to talk about, but yeah, absolutely.
We're keeping it PG here.
Absolutely. PG-13, maybe? So, Jake, I'm going to get it started. I know we want to talk prospects. I know this is, I think, the true day one of the combine when you look at them actually doing athletic things and not have Sam Howell being asked to shoot baskets for the Eagles. But I'm going to ease into it a little bit and do a little roast me or toast me. And this week, there were 2 trades, one of which involved you and I. But one that preceded that was one between myself and Tyler. And it was a big one. It was a mover and a shaker, and who knows, it could completely implode my team depending on how one of these players does. But I want to get your thoughts on it. So I get Christian McCaffrey and Jamison Crowder, and Tyler would be getting DJ Chark, the 2022 1.01, and the 2023 second, which is my second. So theoretically, if I implode, it's probably going to be an early second for next year. So what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are it's an even trade. The 1-1 is down just a bit this year, at least looking forward, if you will. So from a perception standpoint of a Dynasty player, we don't view number 1 in 2022 as we would number 1 in other years, depending on who you are. And so I think when you trade number 1 and then you add another pick to it and then DJ Chark, and you're getting DJ Chark, correct?
No, I'm sending DJ Chark.
Okay,
so he was that extra piece. If it was going to be either Chark or I actually had said Ronald Jones, kind of like pick your poison of which young guy do you want?
So you're sold on McCaffrey. Okay, so if he's getting the Jaguars at this point, number 1 receiver, 101 overall in 2022, and then a future second-round pick, I still think that's a toss-up because Chark has some injury history, and he has not performed well with Trevor Lawrence, and he's got a new coach, so we don't know if he's going to still be the number 1. They have Laviska Shenault, and I think Marvin Jones was on a 1-year deal, so I think he's gone. But Shenault, he's in that 3rd year. He's in that break-it season as an NFL player. They have Dan Arnold still under contract, and he showed out last year for both the Panthers and Jaguars, sort of as Lawrence's number 1 target when he was healthy in Jacksonville. So I think that Chark has to come back and show up, and the 1-1, either if it's Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, if he loves Kenneth Walker, or if he loves Jamison Williams, even coming off the ACL, Treylon Burks from Arkansas, he's got to connect on that number 1 to win that trade, regardless of how DJ Chark turns out, or regardless of that second-round pick. So whomever he picks really has to become like almost Hall of Fame caliber, because if it were not for injuries of Christian McCaffrey, he'd be one of the greatest running backs of the last 20 years, in my opinion. I know that's somewhat of a recency bias, but I'll tell you, he's only played 6 to 7 games the last 2 years. The NFL would hate to see a healthy Christian McCaffrey in 2022 and beyond. And he's 25, going on his age 26 season. I understand running backs start to slow down. So I'm not roasting you. I'm not toasting you, because I feel like that either side at this point could win that trade. It's just pending the Christian McCaffrey injury, because if he is what he was for the next 2 years, then I think the rest of our fantasy league is going to have hell to pay. But if he's hurt, then you're in a tough spot.
My thought too was I did get DJ Chark. It was a couple weeks into last season. It was a 1-for-1 James Conner for DJ Chark. Looking back at it, I know Conner had one hell of a year, but I think there's no way. I don't know if he comes back to the Cardinals, whether it's his choice or the Cardinals' choice, And looking at the amount of touchdowns that he was able to generate, I know it helped with the offense and the opportunity that he got, and also when Edmonds had gotten injured, but I don't see him recreating that at all. So it was okay to get Chark. And when I got him, he was down with the ankle injury, but him being 6'4", uber athletic, I thought whether he stayed with the Jaguars or he is a unrestricted free agent, I believe. So he may choose to go elsewhere. I'm not sure. But I kind of think either if he stays in Jacksonville or he goes elsewhere, almost anywhere else could be a better situation for him. Certainly if he is not required to be the alpha, but can be the kind of 1B in an offense. And with Christian McCaffrey, of course, I'm a Panthers fan. I almost wore my Luke Kuechly jersey today, but I decided against it. Licensing issues, of course. And seeing his first couple of years, with the first one being 2017, he started out running back 10 and then followed it up with running back 2, 1. Then the last 2 years, he combined for 10 games total. And, it's funny, a litany of injuries that literally only started in 2020. He played every single game in the first three seasons. And it was kind of a mixed bag of, it was ankle, it was AC joint, it was his thigh, it was his hamstring. So it kind of just seemed like a lot of usage things that, following him in the offseason and kind of seeing him when he comes into camp each year, he somehow just looks stronger and stronger. It's bizarre to me, but he clearly takes good care of himself. But I'm sure just that sheer volume that he takes on and that beating, I know it's got to wear him down. And again, he is, that age where, given his number of carries, given his age being about 26, it could be the turning point in a negative way for him. But I kind of think that the Panthers are hopefully going to be smarter with him. The quarterback situation is a complete shit show in Carolina. I very much understand that. The O-line regressed from, I think it was PFF had him ranked as the 10th in his 2017 season, and they now regressed to 31st in last season. So they got pretty bad with a mixture of injuries and them thinking Cam Irvin could be a tackle for them. But I'm hoping that it can be at least a little bit better, but also as they kind of stabilize the offense, the defense is young and it's very stout. So it gives him more opportunity to work out of the backfield and also continue to be a receiver where he can honestly even be a very good slot receiver, even if that was his only role in the offense. So I think his versatility is what allows him to kind of be that almost as a floor 20-point PPR running back that I don't think you can just, find on a tree necessarily. So I'm hoping he's that. If he gets injured, I don't think Jamison Crowder is going to make up the difference. So I'm probably screwed in that sense, but I'm putting all my eggs in the CMC basket.
That's a good basket to be in, especially when he's dating Olivia Munn.
Is he really? Oh, I love it. All right. Well, and she's a Marvel character. So, I mean, that's that. Not for nothing. That's pretty cool.
No, I said Olivia Munn. It's Olivia Culpo.
Oh, okay. Wait. Was it named something familiar? What does she do?
We'd have to Google her. Let's see.
So I know the name. I don't know if it's a model or an actress then.
I think she's a model. She's
okay.
a model.
Gotcha. So he's doing all right, you would say.
He's doing just fine.
Oh, yeah. Well, speaking of people that are doing just fine, we can jump here into the prospect perspective, which I had to practice saying a number of times because I kept messing it up. We can highlight, I know we could get lost in the weeds here and spend hours and hours talking about all these prospects, and I know if we got into the deep sleepers of names from schools that people have never heard of, we might just put them to sleep, Jake. So I think if we just stick with 3 players from each of the main offensive positions and kind of just go over their, maybe not their full prospect profile, but just kind of talk about the perceived pros and cons. And of course, like I said, with today, the day of the recording being the first real day of the combine doing actual physical activity, we can maybe have a little perspective on these prospects.
Game on.
So we'll start off with the quarterbacks, and I think it's only fitting that we start off with Kenny Pickett, who he is the Van Wilder of the college football quarterback realm. And I think he's one of those where being a multi-year starter, some would argue too many, having apparently 8.5-inch hands, which I looked that up just to see. For perspective, the smallest handed quarterback currently is Taysom Hill at 8.75, so I guess 8 3/4. And the last, I guess, prolific quarterback, I don't know how they define that specifically, to have hands that small were 8.75, and it was Michael Vick.
That's right.
That's a whole different breed of quarterback from anyone else in the NFL, past, present, or future. But it's an interesting thing to see. And he did go to Pitt, so it's not to say that he didn't deal with those elements playing there, and again, playing there for many years. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on Kenny Pickett.
I think I'd seen that current quarterbacks are Brandon Allen and technically Taysom Hill are both under 9, but obviously both guys are not day-to-day starters in the NFL, so it's a little different, especially Hill with his dynamic skill set. But to your point, yeah, everybody and their mother that's an NFL fan today is making a big deal of the 8.5-inch hands, and let it be known that, you know, Burrow checked in at 9 the year before last. And, hey, we know what they say about 8.5-inch hands. If they're small hands, you know what you do? What does that mean, Chew? It means small gloves. That's exactly what you were going to say, right?
I was going to say just work harder.
That too. So what do we know about guys wearing gloves? So just off the cuff, I can think about Bridgewater wears a glove on the throwing hand. He's an active quarterback. And I think Peyton Manning, that is, towards the end of his Denver career, I think he was wearing a glove on the throwing hand. For what reason, I can't recall, but I assume it's all grip, accuracy, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So it's obviously not commonplace for a quarterback to wear it on the throwing hand, but Pickett's doing it, and he did it really successfully this year at Pitt. So a couple of things that I jotted down before we got on the chat. So our guy Kenny Pickett turns 24 in June, so he's a little older. He's got 50 career starts in 5 years at Pitt. So obviously he got the COVID year. He played his freshman year, so he got that COVID year. 5 years at Pitt, 50 starts. In 2021, he threw 42 touchdowns. In his first 4 seasons, take a guess at how many combined touchdowns he threw.
Do you want me to not look at the numbers? But what I'm remembering, I'm trying to think. Combined? All right, I don't have that in front of me, actually. What do you combine for 30?
Great guess. So 2021, 42 touchdowns. The previous 4 years, not 3 years, the previous 4 years, he threw 38 touchdowns.
Okay.
So pretty significant difference. Our boy Kenny Pickett turned it on in his age 23 season. You know, he kind of found that late career magic. And obviously you talk about Joe Burrow and what he was or was not at Ohio State. In his first year starting at LSU, he was good, not great. And then next thing you know, boom, with that all-star cast that they had in 2019, they put it all together in one of the greatest college football teams of all time. And obviously Joe led his team to the Super Bowl this year. And I think so he's drawing some of those comparisons to Joe Burrow as a late developer. And I certainly respect that and appreciate that. And certainly he has the stats to back it up in 21. But I think that I sort of do appreciate about him just his confidence level. You know, I go back to that very particular play we all remember from the ACC championship and the fake slide he had, which was obviously outlawed in college football moving forward. But it took an incredible amount of wit to be able to think about that in real time, to make that move and then cut up field. And by the way, he ran away from the Wake defense. I understood they froze, but he ran away from that Wake defense and he scored. I thought that was pretty clever of him. So I think he's got a lot of confidence, and he's got, you know, those words you only hear about quarterbacks like moxie and charisma that we only use in these certain like NFL draft type scenarios. I think that he's that to a T. He's got the flow. He's got the hair. That says a lot about I think who he is and just his character. As far as just being that like Joe Cool personality, or in his case that Kenny Cool personality. So I'm a fan. I think he's probably going to go in the top 5 picks of even Superflex dynasties.
Absolutely. And yeah, like you were saying, certainly with it being a quarterback, it's looking to see maybe what draft position could be too. And even in the true NFL draft, I had seen a mock recently saying that it could in fact be the Panthers that take him at 6, which there is a need there for sure. And if you have somebody like Kenny Pickett, who clearly showed a lot of poise in this past season, which again, it was a big jump, like you'd mentioned, the cumulative touchdown stats from the previous 4 seasons. And he stepped up in a major way. And I mean, he elevated that entire organization, and as only a good quarterback can do. But plenty of respect to, his, as you say, moxie. And I don't know that his baby hands will stop him from being an early, either the first or the second quarterback off. I can't see him slipping past the first or second quarterback. I think the biggest thing is just seeing in the NFL draft when these quarterbacks are starting to be drafted. But I think it's a no-brainer that Pickett's 1 or 2, I would say. And I have to imagine, certainly with his poise on the field, I'd have to think that his interviews and how he just kind of shows with teams, I'd have to think that that's probably going pretty well also. So I would say he's going to do nothing but continue to impress. It's just, do the other quarterbacks even supersede what he is currently doing and has done? So let's see. I'm going to be a bit of a downer here. So we're going to go from Kenny Pickett, and we're going to step down a little bit to Carson Strong. And he has slipped a bit. I know in the Senior Bowl showing, it was not excellent, which I didn't think for most of the quarterbacks. I would say aside from Malik Willis, as a whole, it wasn't too great for any of them. But Carson Strong, he's big. He's got a big arm. He's what Elway had in mind. But he does have some mobility issues in terms of how he truly plays, but also some actual mobility issues maybe down the road. And I think multiple knee injuries in the same knee. And it's been said that he's not necessarily wildly concerned about that, and that he could certainly play. And I would say that probably is the case considering how well protected quarterbacks are nowadays. But looking at it, I mean, he was a very efficient quarterback at Nevada. And of course, with that big arm and big playability and the big frame, I think he kind of has the look of what you'd want your quarterback to be. I'm not fully buying in. I think he's kind of a safe pick to have as a depth piece and can maybe be elevated to a starter down the road. But I think he's maybe a higher floor but lower ceiling quarterback. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on Carson Strong.
Yeah, I think that I was really high on him mid-season, and then I started to just read some of the reviews, if you will, from draft experts. And really, what I came back with is it more so is it a plus arm, or is it more so just a average arm? And is he dealing with I can't call the tight end's name, but he's got a really strong tight end out there who I think is in this NFL class. And I know for a fact Romeo Doubs, his top wideout, is in this NFL class. And he certainly showed out for Nevada this year and for Carson Strong. So I think he had a nice strong core to throw to. He doesn't move well in the pocket. In fact, he doesn't move well. He's not mobile at all. So it's not a situation of, he's slightly mobile. He's pretty much a statue back there. So he's going to probably run, I don't know, a 5.0 in the 40, if I had to guess. And you mentioned the knee challenge. So it's not that I'm here to not be in the Carson Strong mix. But I think that at best, he's probably a third round NFL pick, maybe looking towards the back half of the fifth, even, if I had to think what's the best case versus what's probably reality.
Yeah, I could see him being not a one-for-one comparison, but how Jacob Eason was viewed coming into the draft of, he's got this big arm and he looks like, that prototypical passer that the NFL wants to see. And this being a little bit different than that case, but I think it would be one where he's certainly not going to be the first, the second, the third.
Fourth or fifth.
Fourth or fifth. I mean, with how I've heard some of the guys talk about, say, like a Desmond Ridder, where that's a guy that I don't see it, but seeing how he had tested a little bit today, athletic as hell, big frame, and accuracy has been a concern, which is a problem for a quarterback. But I think the thought is he could be coached up and they could kind of figure out some of those mechanics. Okay. But yeah, let's actually shift to one of my favorites, and that would be Sam Howell of UNC. And I was not previously wildly high on him, at least prior to this college football season. But I mean, he certainly battled some adversity in losing almost all of his offensive weapons and the O-line being atrocious. And I know that should never really be an excuse to say a quarterback can't overcome that and can't work within the offense and within his weapons. But he does have, kind of like you mentioned, moxie for Pickett. I kind of see Howell as being that gamer of he kind of, I don't want to say he transformed, but he kind of adjusted his offensive output to be, he had at or almost or above 800 rushing yards in this past season. Not to say that he didn't rush before, but that's an element of his game that he chose to stifle, or the fact that he didn't need it because he had the likes of Daz Newsome. He had a heck of a running back core in Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. So he didn't need to do that. And I know he isn't necessarily the tallest quarterback prospect, but he is a bit of a boulder. And I think he runs intelligently as a quarterback and doesn't necessarily take too much abuse, or at least not as much as he would have to. But I think that combination of him being a willing passer, he's got mobility, whether it's being mobile behind the line of scrimmage or whether it's truly just breaking out and rushing with it. I like him. I like him, I think, more than most people do. I don't know how it translates to the NFL. It could just be he's great in college and he gets it done, but when he gets to the NFL, he can't kind of pull it all together as a starting quarterback. But what are your thoughts on Sam?
My thoughts are he's not very tall. So back in 2019, December of 2019, Sam won the ACC Rookie of the Year award, and I was at a dinner table, and I was at the ACC Awards dinner that year. I was at the dinner table. I didn't know who this person was, but he looked young and he looked like he was a couple inches taller than me. I just thought that he was just a fan like me. And then they called Sam Howell up for ACC Rookie of the Year, and it was this guy standing a few feet away from me. And I was like, whoa, he's only a couple inches taller than me and doesn't look that much bigger than me. And he's the best player in the ACC in 2019 as far as freshmen go. So I think he measured in at just a touch over 6 feet, which I think Malik Willis did as well. And I thought it was interesting that this past year or two, he had 65 forced missed tackles in 2021, which is the most of any Power 5 quarterback since 2014. So I may give my guy a hard time for being a Charlotte native and not being that tall, so I thought. But my guy knows how to get rid of defenders, and I think there's something to be said about that. He rolls out a ton, and it kind of gives me that, like, does he have that Baker syndrome where he's awesome in college but continues to roll out to the right and scramble? I think he was third in the nation in scramble attempts this year, if I recall that correctly. But he does a lot of things well. He had 24 touchdowns, 3,000 yards passing in 2021. That does not include his over 800 yards rushing as well. And he's also the youngest of the big five quarterbacks that are in this year's draft, if you will. So I think there's something to be said that he's still 21 and will turn 22 in August. You talked about that 2020 season when he had Daz Newsome, De'Ami Brown, Michael Carter, and Javonte Williams. That was an all-star cast. It couldn't have gotten any better. And so for him to still have a relatively strong year in 2021, he wasn't going to play better than in 2020. He didn't have the cast around him. And, not everybody's Kobe Bryant. He couldn't make everybody around him better, He made most people around him better, but he couldn't make everybody better at every single play. So I think I like him. I think he's a second-round grade is where I would take him. But I also would be cautious, one, of the height, and two, of his tendency to roll out. I think that's a little bit scary for me.
Yeah, and that's a very good point about mentioning the rollout and kind of likening it to Baker Mayfield, where you can kind of just make it work in college. But when you have much bigger, much smarter defenders, coordinators, coaches, and everybody that are specifically game planning for you, and if they know that you're going to be the not quite 6'1" quarterback that's going to be rolling out, you better be the most athletic guy in the field because you just are not able to figure that out and kind of overcome that shortcoming there. So no disrespect to any other quarterbacks, but those are the three we're highlighting, and we're jumping over to the running backs. And we're going to start with a guy that I know you do like a lot, and that is Kenneth Walker out of Michigan State. And I want to let you go ahead and jump in first, and I just want to hear your thoughts on Kenneth Walker, what you like, what you don't like.
Kenny. So the second Kenny for our conversation this evening. So I love Kenneth Walker. He's my number one pick on my Superflex and my regular Dynasty draft board. Let me repeat, Superflex, he's still my number one. I know he's a one-hit wonder. He's coming out of Wake Forest, and he transferred to Michigan State and Mel Tucker. He had the one amazing year, so he did the right thing, 21 years old, coming out of college after his junior year. He had 1,100 yards rushing, but I think the thing that sets Kenneth Walker apart this year, and that what really makes me think that he is number one overall, is he was first in the country in yards after contact in 2021. He was also first in the country in missed tackles forced with 89 forced missed tackles. I think the question that you have to ask about him is how fast is he? So obviously we know we're recording this on a Thursday. I hope it's okay to say that. And then tomorrow the running backs will run their 40s at the NFL Combine. I don't know if he's running. I'm assuming that he is. And I think that probably is going to be the tail of the tape, if you will, as far as where he's going to go in the NFL draft. I think he's a second rounder. I think that if you look at a team like the Miami Dolphins or Atlanta Falcons, and there's a couple of other teams that really need a running back, I think he could go to somebody like them in the second round, and I think that's where he should go. He's definitely more of a power back, but I think he is an every down back. I think he only had 13 receptions in 2021 for like less than 100 yards. So is he really a receiving back? I haven't heard that he's not per se, but I think that there's more to be desired. And maybe he's got that trait and he just hasn't shown it yet. And maybe the NFL is where he's going to in the second round this year.
Yeah, I think when you look at his, again, it is a lack of receiving production. It's not definitively a lack of receiving chops. And who knows if he were to be put in that position at Michigan State or even at Wake Forest, obviously, what that would have looked like. But I would say it helps that he is either the best or maybe second pure runner in this class. So I think when you have that elite of a skill set and doesn't necessarily overshadow if he maybe is not a capable receiver, and certainly in today's NFL, it helps to have an all-in-one, even if being just his running ability is his key thing. At a minimum, being able to take dump offs and maybe wheel routes here and there. Not necessarily that every running back is asked to split out to the slot and make and figure it out, but yeah, like I said, I mean, best pure runner in the class, and he does have a good combination. Like you were saying, we'll see what the 40 time is, but he does have a good combination of being able to read inside the tackles. He's pretty compact and can run with power, but it's not just using the power to bulldoze, but he tends to just shed tackles, and I think that does help with his speed and his vision. Help him whether it's inside or he does at times bounce it outside. But I think when I see him bounce it outside, that's when I'm concerned about the 40 time in terms of he's not just I can get to the outside every time and I can beat everybody. But if he makes it enough to the outside, he does have the power and is slippery enough to be able to shake off a cornerback or a safety. So I think, yeah, second round draft capital. And I'm very curious. I think which team he lands on is going to be a big, big boon for it could be, and I'm not comparing these two players, the difference between once Clyde Edwards-Helaire went to Kansas City, everyone freaked out and picked Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I am not saying they're the same runner, and I do like Kenneth Walker more, but if he were to get a good landing spot like that and be a clear lead back for either one of the teams that you mentioned, I think that would be a huge boon for his super flex or single quarterback draft stock. And this next guy we're looking at, someone who I'm incredibly high on, not as necessarily like the running back one or anything, but a little bit higher than most I've learned, is Kyren Williams out of Notre Dame. And seeing his production and seeing his stats before I actually watched any bit of his tape, the assumption was basically he can hope to be Austin Eckler, but that's kind of the mold that he would look to achieve in terms of his receiving chops, a willing blocker on third down. He is small, but watching him even without looking at his height and weight, because I was really concerned if he was going to be under 200 pounds at the combine, he's pretty compact for his size, and he looks that way and plays that way. Not necessarily too powerful, but watching him in a number of goal line situations at Notre Dame, he handled it very well, and it was running inside the tackles too. So I think it helped that there was nothing as a runner he was overwhelmingly good at, but he seemed to have a good concept of waiting for the right lane, not like a vicious one cut and be able to really accelerate out of it. But he seemed to be a bit slippery. And when you combine that with him being, I would say, one of the better receiving running backs in the NFL, in the college football this year for a prospect, I think that could be a good thing for him and maybe a better runner of a Kenny Gainwell. I know that I don't think he's going to nearly run as fast as he will, but I'm very excited to see where Kyren Williams lands, and I would like to pick him, but we'll see what happens this year. What do you think?
I do like Kyren. I think that he's likely the third running back off the NFL draft board. He's my third overall ranked running back as far as dynasty drafts are concerned and rookie running backs. My squad is Virginia Tech in college football. That's obviously my alma mater, and my dude, Kyren Williams, did Virginia Tech dirty this year. I know he was a highly rated recruit, and he had an awesome game against Virginia Tech when they were sort of in that QB shuffle. Was it Jack Cohn? Is it one of the two freshmen that they had under Brian Kelly? And he really, in my mind, frankly, he won that game for them. So, you know, you mentioned that he's slightly undersized, but I think he's an incredibly confident and shifty runner. and I really look for him. I don't know if he can be a 3-down back in the NFL, but I think that the NFL doesn't really lend itself to 3-down backs anymore. Nobody's really expected to do that outside of a select few like Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, and just a couple of others. So in that regard, I think he can have a very successful career, and I think he's probably a late second to third round pick in the NFL draft this year.
And I think we're going to end it strong here, and I do mean that pun very seriously. So this is a guy who not even on my radar at all, and I see you just diving deep for a little Pierre Strong out of South Dakota State. So I want you to go ahead and talk a little bit about him. What do you like, and what made you want to talk about him on this episode?
Yeah, man, I love to get rowdy with an FCS player every year. You know, every year there's the FCS gives out the Walter Payton Player of the Year award. And if you notice, if you go back and look at who's won that award, a lot of those names you're going to know. And I'm not going to say any because I kind of want you to go back and look sometime when you have some free time. Go look at some of those names. And while it's not Pierre Strong, I say all that, so it's not my guy Pierre. But
wait, why did you lead in with all? That's fantastic. I love it. Go ahead.
But he could have been that guy. And I think that in other years, I think that he would have been. But my guy, Pierre Strong from South Dakota State, he had 10 100-yard games in 2021. 10 of them. Not too shabby. He's just a shade under 6 feet. So as far as running backs go, that's actually a little bit bigger than we're used to seeing. And so I like that size that he has. He's not the fastest or strongest runner, but he is a consistent runner. He was in the Shrine Bowl. So he was in the East-West Shrine Bowl. He didn't make the Reese's Senior Bowl, but he had a 65-yard screen pass touchdown in that game. And by all accounts was probably the most electric, elusive player on offense in that game. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. He also, I feel like I should mention, so this is a compliment to Mel Kiper and just his depth and perception of players in drafts, because I found Pierre from Mel Kiper's draft board. So he was like 6 or 7 on his running back rankings. And so I felt like I needed to do my own research. And the more research I did, the more enamored I was with Pierre. So we're not going to hear as much about an FCS running back due to the competition, but it would not surprise me at all. Like, I have Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, Kyren Williams, James Cook from Georgia, who split time with Zamir White, and then I have Pierre Strong. Lists are going to be different, but for me, he's the 5th running back on my board, and I think he's a 4th-round running back, which I think there's a lot of value in Dynasty for a 4th-round running back, because a lot of times they end up being the backup to somebody. That person gets hurt, in steps somebody like Pierre Strong, and I'm a big fan of his.
And I like that.
Oh
yeah.
Hey, if I can mention really quickly.
Please do.
My guy Pierre had 5 passing touchdowns in college. How about that, Chew?
That's fantastic. See, and look at the stats I'm looking at. It doesn't even have a column for that, because you would not have guessed that would have been the case. But this man is a Swiss Army knife. And like you're saying, maybe he deserves to be the Walter Payton Man of the Year. Would you say?
Couldn't agree more.
Absolutely. Well, and watching his tape, certainly looking at his stats, I mean, he was a solid producer. And like you were saying, I mean, really showed out in this most recent season. And he did a little bit too in the receiving game, but more specifically watching his tape, nothing jumped out in the sense of he is the best in this class at A, B, or C, but he seemed to do a bit of everything. He had good vision. He had a good one cut out of the backfield. Once he's in kind of the open field and at to the next level, he seemed to be able to kind of navigate that pretty well and not get too focused on the end zone and just try to burn it down the field. He was really, really reading on where each defender was at and being able to weave through them. So I would say that I would not have even thought to look at this guy if you would not have mentioned it. And I'm glad that you did. Don't worry, I don't have that many picks in the rookie draft this year, so I likely will not steal them from you. But I think that he is someone who clearly did incredibly well in college, and it does seem like it's someone who the NFL would take a chance on, because watching his tape, I don't know how you say he can't do it and he can't produce. And like you also said too, his size and everything, it will translate well to the NFL. And even if it's a depth piece, if he's a willing player in special teams or whatever he needs to do, if he's one of those guys to stay on a roster and get that chance, then I think he's going to do incredibly well. And that was a strong way to end the running back segment. That's the last.
Very strong.
That's the last strong pun I have for today, planned at least.
That's a shame.
I know. And as we transition over to the wide receivers, we will look at the, sorry to say it, second best Ohio State wide receiver into this draft, and that would be Chris Olave. And I hate to take it from a Michael Jackson song, but he's a smooth criminal. I mean, you hear that, not that people have called him a smooth criminal, but they do call him smooth, how he plays. Not so much effortless, but he is used a bit all around the field, being able to do bubble screens and stuff too. When you hear about a guy that is a good route runner and has maybe not great speed, but a speed that translates well on the football field and great hands as well, it's someone who you wouldn't figure is doing things like a bubble screen or is used all around. And I mean, at any point on the field, he just seems to produce. And it's one of those where I hear that it's not, he gets overshadowed by Garrett Wilson, but in his own right, Chris Olave is, I would say he could be a great wide receiver too on an NFL team. And that is nothing to scoff at, because in what today's NFL is for passing volume, you can be very, very productive in PPR as a wide receiver too for a team. So what are your thoughts on Chris Olave?
I think Chris Olave is Steve Smith. I really do. He's bigger than Steve Smith. He's a little over 6 feet tall. I know he's slight at like 190 pounds, but you mentioned that he's not very fast. So, well, I don't know. You said he didn't have a ton of speed, and that's an accurate statement. So what he is, he's fast in a straight line. The wide receivers are running as we speak in the NFL Combine for their 40s. He might run a 4.3 in the 40. The question is he quick in his breaks? I think that's the one thing that we have to have answered from Chris Olave, because, excuse me, Chew, he had 14.5 yards per catch in 2021. He had 4 multi-touchdown games in 2021. And better yet, only 2 games. In only 2 of Ohio State's games did he not score. So he scored in 10 of 12 games this year. I think there's a lot to say about a man who can get in the end zone 10 out of 12 times. That's a pretty good percentage. You took the words. I literally have smooth criminal written down about Chris Olave. Because,
oh, man.
And you know what? You threw me for a loop when you said we're going to talk about the second best wide receiver at Ohio State. You said Chris Olave. I would have said that's Garrett Wilson. Ooh. I know Garrett Wilson could be an a top 10 NFL draft pick this year, but I love me some Chris Olave. And I think, I've got a top 5 pick in my 2 dynasties this year. And depending on how 1-2 go, Chris Olave is the number 3 guy on my board. And, I could, even in a super flex, I could see myself pulling the trigger on Chris Olave because I believe that much in him. I think my dude is downright dirty, and I think that he may not have that highest ceiling of Treylon Burks, Jamison Williams, Drake London, Garrett Wilson. He may not have the ceiling that those guys do. My humble opinion, he's got the higher floor of all of them, and his ceiling is right there beneath them. So I think that's who I'm going with if it's the 3rd pick and the other 2 picks don't go as I foresee.
Well, and I respect that, and I think he's someone who, he certainly has a lot of polish, which for a receiver, I know that might be I think it's a better thing to say than moxie for a quarterback, but I think as a wide receiver, they stress a lot of things like, are you a route runner? Are you a willing blocker? Are you a number of different things? And I would say that he certainly has the tangibles that you want in any receiver that you want to have on your NFL team. And I think certainly for fantasy, that would translate into him getting on the field. And again, with these multiple wide receiver sets, I think that it's going to allow him, he's going to show out in camp. He's going to do well. And, certainly if he's able to beat out what is on most teams, probably if there's a free agent receiver coming in, if he's able to beat them out, he may not be the alpha, but he can certainly be someone who's on the field and produces reasonably well, I would say. And
sure. If I may jump in, Shu, so
absolutely.
He's got the most touchdown receptions of any Ohio State receiver ever. He's got 35 touchdown passes. That's more than Santonio Holmes, Joey Galloway, Garrett Wilson, Ted Ginn, Terry McLaurin. Those are some big names, and he's got more touchdowns than any of those guys. And you could say, yeah, he stayed all 4 years. That's true, but I think there's a lot to be said for that.
No, and it allowed him to, certainly, I don't want it to be washed away that I know that certainly for quarterbacks, when you think about some of the quarterback, like the passing records, and it's like some of the names may be obscure because it's like, they decided to be a 4-year starter and they weren't necessarily maybe the best in terms of just raw talent, but like you were mentioning, a number of his statistics for Olave from this past year, it showed consistent production and production that mattered when it results in touchdowns. And I mean, that Ohio State offense was wide open this year, as it is many years, but that does speak to, as I alluded, as I consider him to be the second best receiver from the Ohio State team this year. I don't mean it as a diss, as that is what was one hell of an offense, and they were led by one hell of a quarterback too. But in terms of, like you were saying, having a good floor is never a bad thing. It allows you to pick someone and know you're going to get X number of catches, working underneath, working on the outside, in really whatever scheme you need to have him in. So he can certainly be that guy for, I would say, a wider number of teams versus some of these receivers maybe needing to be in certain schemes and with certain quarterbacks to kind of unlock their potential and their ceiling. So speaking of ceilings, this is a guy that can touch almost any ceiling, and that is Drake London, who is, I've toyed with this, he's my wide receiver one in this class, and even after the injury, I still feel good about him. I know that I think when he measured in today or yesterday, he wasn't quite 6'5". I think he was 6'3" and some change. But watching him play, everything I heard about him, certainly with his size, it makes sense. He is a bit slight when you're 6'4", 6'5", or I guess 6'3" and some change. I can understand that, but he's always talked about his contested catch ability, and that is on full display in many of the highlights that you're going to see on YouTube or whatever. But he works very well in the middle and underneath to kind of sink under routes and kind of split between linebackers. And I think that's something that goes a bit unnoticed or unmentioned. And his ability to also, once he catches the ball, get upfield and not be too slippery, but he does have good speed to be able to do that. And I don't think it should be pushed down or neglected that he can kind of do it anywhere on the field. But if you want to get a true alpha, I think in today's NFL still, it takes someone who has at least a bit of that size to be able to make those contested catches. But if you can do it everywhere else, like underneath and through zones, I think that allows you to stay on the field more often than not. So what are your thoughts on Drake London?
My thoughts are, is he going to be able to separate from defenders in the NFL? I think that's the one big question about him. Yes, he's a big receiver. He's going to tower over defensive backs and corner safeties in the NFL. He can pluck on the run. He can make some moves. He's got large strides. Yes, he broke his foot. He'll make a full recovery if he's not already. But what's he going to run in the 40? Can he separate from defenders in the NFL? And I think that's a major question mark. A lot of people are comparing him to Mike Evans. That's a lofty comparison, as we well know. And Mike has made a very successful career in the NFL. So if he's Mike Evans, power to him. I do not see it. I'm actually, of the 5 great receivers in this draft, I think I have him number 5. So I see how a lot of people have him number 1, and maybe, I just have that East Coast bias, and I will happily admit that, and I will, I will answer to that when I'm wrong. But for now, before the draft, before he's played down football in the NFL, I'm not sold on Drake London.
Fair enough. And and I definitely see the comparisons to Mike Evans. I saw him kind of more as a Keenan Allen, and I'm not going to say he's as good as Keenan Allen. I know the tough thing with comps is oftentimes it's picking, right, who are the top 5 to 10 players at this position? Let's compare them to those guys. But in terms of relatable ones that people would know, I see him as a poor man's Keenan Allen. He has that size, and I know with being able to work around different spots on the field, his speed's going to be questionable for sure with what his 40 is going to be. But he seems to be able to, with that wingspan, with that size, I know you don't want to have a defender draped on you and have to be reaching outside of your body to be able to pluck the ball away. Because once you make it to the NFL and you have those quarterbacks that are rangier and able to kind of smack that ball out, you better have strong hands too to be able to hold on to it. But I'm hoping that he's able to work and refine his route running to be able to kind of separate on those breaks, so that whether it's underneath or on the outside, it can give him that little bit of extra separation that he may need with a healthy ankle, of course, to produce as a hopefully fantasy asset on my team. Realistically, I don't know if I'll get him or not, or if I'll actually be able to pull the trigger at the 103. We'll see. But
yeah, and he was also a basketball player at at USC. So he was a two-sport athlete there for a period of time. That says a lot about an athlete. So he clearly can play, and he's clearly really athletic. That goes without saying if he's playing two sports at a major D1 institution.
Absolutely. And so for the final wide receiver in this group, and I'll let you start talking about him first, we've got John Metchie out of Alabama. So what do you think about him?
Out of Alabama, but born in Taiwan, lived in Ghana and Canada, and found himself in Tuscaloosa, Alabama with Nick Saban. My guy Metchie, I don't know if it's because he wears number 8 or what, but in 5 of his last 7 games at Alabama before he tore his ACL, he had over 100 yards receiving. He's slight as well. He's shade under. I think he's about $185, shade under 6 feet tall. And I think that's ultimately gonna hurt him when it comes to NFL draft time. And I think I saw the latest mock had him as a 4th rounder. But any time I ever watched him in Alabama, that guy was open underneath on his slant routes and his out routes. It didn't matter. He was open. And I think he's going to be a nice complement to an alpha, a dominant wide receiver 1 as he was with Jameson Williams this past year with Alabama. And you saw Jameson really struggled before his injury in the championship game to get open. And I think a lot of that actually had to do with not having John Metchie on the field. So I think John Metchie is actually a really nice complement to any offense. I think about the likes of T.Y. Hilton. I think that could be a ceiling for him. I shouldn't say the likes of. I think about T.Y. Hilton when I see John Metchie, and I think that's a really tough, really tight knit comparison, and that's something that I think that I will be overdrafting John Metchie in dynasty drafts for that reason.
Well, he's someone who I looked at briefly earlier in the process, and not that I didn't bat an eye by any means, because he improved his production year over year. His catch rate got better, his target share got better, his receiving yards got better, his receptions got better. Everything about his production improved every single year. And certainly a tough thing to do if you're improving your catch rate as you're increasing your yardage and your receptions, because that lends itself to you becoming a more efficient receiver. And you could also mention the quarterback in the process too, but he's someone who I do maybe see him as, if I mention Olave, and I'm not specifically comparing the two guys, if I consider Olave as, I don't see him as being able to elevate to an alpha, but being a good wide receiver too. If like you're mentioning there, Metchie being considered possibly a 4th rounder in the NFL, which is absurd in my opinion. That would be an incredible discount to get a wide receiver 2 in the 4th round, because he did nothing but improve and produce. And yes, he did have that injury, but he's someone who can do it a bit all over the field. And I think he's got the good size, the good frame. And I know we will not be able to test, of course, but we'll have good speed, good NFL speed to be able to be a sneaky good PPR guy for fantasy purposes. And aside from kickers, let's go ahead and transition to the second best position in fantasy football, and that is the tight end.
Love it.
And
Let's do it.
The first guy we're going to talk about, someone who I initially had started following after I guess we'll call it the upswing of their team, is Isaiah Likely. And I noticed some of his combine statistics were released today. Athletic marvel, I think, and he had the highest vertical of tight ends. I don't know about the broad jump. And he's one of those where he did nothing but produce, and I understand that he did go to Coastal. So I guess something can be said about the level of competition, but the team was incredibly successful, and he was very much a big piece of that. And there's something to be said about those athletic, high-producing tight ends, because there's a number of tight ends that they have that athletic prowess and put it on full display with whatever limited opportunities they get in college, a la Dawson Knox or, say, a Foster Moreau. But he was one of those who likely was able to do it in college, both getting the opportunities and having the athletic ability. So I think it leaves less doubt or less mystery for some of these NFL teams to say, yeah, but can he do it on the NFL level? And he did it with reasonable volume in college football. And again, it was for Coastal, but it lends itself to him being able to be that tight end that works up the seam that is so popular in today's NFL. So what do you think about Isaiah Likely?
I think he likely had one drop in the 21 season.
Yes.
How about that? Yeah, so he had 59 grabs in 2021, which is twice as many as he had in 2020 and 2019 combined. He started as a 2-star wide receiver recruit coming out of high school. He was a wide receiver, got a lot bigger, a little taller, more physical, became a better blocker, and he became a tight end, and now he's a perennial, potentially the first tight end off the board in the NFL draft. Depending on who you read to, I think I've seen him as the second or third best tight end in the upcoming draft class. I have a hard time with that. I really love Trey McBride, who we'll talk about in just a minute. The issue with Isaiah Likely is not the hands. He might be the best pass catcher / route runner in this draft. There's a lot to be said for that, and maybe that's why he'll be the first tight end off the board, depending on the offense that takes him. But my guy is not a great blocker. He really struggles. It's more of a push and pray type situation. And that's never good. You never want to be pushing and praying on anything in life. And so I think that's really going to be a drawback, and that's a hindrance to why I don't know if he's going to be an every down tight end in the NFL. Maybe he can be. I just don't see him as being the first overall tight end off of fantasy boards or Dynasty fantasy boards as well as the NFL draft.
Yeah, and I don't see him as the first or even the second necessarily off the board, but I will say if we're going to throw out comps here, and this is maybe one that is more realistic in the sense of not saying he's a lesser version of the best tight end ever. I kind of see him more as a Jacob Hollister, and he's a little undersized, but very athletic and clearly has very good receiving chops. And while I definitely understand the blocking concerns, I think in certain offenses, it would allow him to be paired with, say, a very good blocking tight end. And in certain formations, it can kind of allow him to utilize those receiving chops, work over the middle or up the seam. And he can, of course, improve as a blocker. But if his focus and his talents are certainly as a receiver, it would be foolish to think that a team could not bring him in and utilize those to the fullest as he is. I didn't even realize he was a former receiver, but it definitely shows as in his playability on the field. So we're going to transition to, aside from Trey McBride, my favorite tight end in this class, and that is Charlie Kolar. And I did just make that name up, and it makes no sense. But out of Iowa State, he is a behemoth of a human being 6'6", I think a shade over 250. But watching his tape and what his production was is absolutely absurd to me over his 4 years at Iowa State. Watching it go from 3 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns, and 6 touchdowns, which is reasonably consistent. But in terms of his production, I wanted to highlight seeing 51 catches, 44 catches, and 62 catches, and 697 yards, 591 yards, and 756 yards. It shows that he was able to work very well as just a receiving producer and not specifically as a red zone threat, although watching plenty of his tape, he was well utilized as a red zone threat. One of which I don't remember the team that he was playing against, but seeing him very intelligently be able to get his foot down but pluck a ball in the back right of the end zone. He's one of those guys where he plays as a receiver in terms of just his ability and his sensibility on the field. I don't know his blocking prowess in terms of when I was watching his tape, but I do see him as one where that sheer size, and I kind of comped him to Kyle Rudolph, and someone who he's not going to be asked to block a ton, but he is a very big guy. He is a bit slight, I guess, when you see him as 6'6", if he's going to be up against a defensive end who may be a bit shorter, but certainly more compact and powerful. But I think he's someone who can go to a team and maybe similar to Likely, but a little bit taller, can be a very good red zone threat, or if he's improves a bit as a blocker, can be more heavily utilized in the middle of the field in a more vertical offense. So what do you think about Mr. K?
I don't think a lot, to be honest. And I don't say that as that I don't think a lot of him as a player, but I don't know a lot. I know he was very successful with Brock Purdy and Matt Campbell at Iowa State. But I've not done the research necessary, and I have no problem admitting that I will get there before our Superflex draft in May. But I'm not there, and Mr. Kolar, I'm not yet there. I have a handful of tight ends. He didn't make my top 5 in tight ends just yet, and so maybe it sounds like I need to do some more research, and I look forward to it. But the jury is still out for me on Mr. Kolar.
Well, speaking of jury, someone needs to arrest this next man for being an absolute beef castle. And that is, I actually wrote in my notes, beef castle. And that is Trey McBride. His production at Colorado State as a 4-year starter, having his target share increase season over season, going from 3% to 12% to 29% to somehow 34% in his final season at Colorado State. I try to think of a college football program that would have the tight end command 34% of the target share. And the only person that I can think of it making sense for is Trey McBride. Watching his tape, it's bizarre to see that he only was able to amass 10 touchdowns in his entire college career, with only 1 touchdown in his final season. But the production that he was able to achieve, over 1,100 yards in his final season. I mean, this guy got it done, and I would have to think maybe his only limitation as a tight end being 6'3". I know he's, built like a damn truck, but being a bit shorter than I would say most tight ends, when you look at those that are prominent red zone threats, if you think about, and I'm not loving this player, but just for the sake of his frame, maybe a Jimmy Graham, a former basketball guy. You don't need to be that tall, but it helps to have some height to be able to pluck some of those balls in the NFL in the red zone. And I don't know that he will have great success with that. But if you consider his just raw athletic ability and his ability to catch, I think that he's going to be a great asset to almost any NFL team. And with that compact of a frame, his ability to both block and receive, I think that will allow him to not necessarily need to be paired with another tight end that is strictly the blocker or another tight end that is strictly the receiver. I think that he can do a bit of both. I think we'll see those receiving touchdowns increase a good amount under what would hopefully be an offensive mind that will know how to use them. So what do you think about our boy Trey?
Yeah, it's a phenomenal point. I have a slight tangent at first. So you mentioned the basketball piece in Jimmy Graham, and I thought about Tony Gonzalez at Cal, Mo Ali Cox with the Colts now from VCU. Who else? Antonio Gates played basketball at Kent State. There's another few guys that played basketball. And Drake London, your boy, played basketball at USC. So I don't know. I just got on that basketball tangent for a second. But back to Trey McBride. He's a man amongst boys. And he's just a freak and an animal on the football field. He had 90 receptions in 2021. Chew, you said he had 34% of the target share at Colorado State in 2021. He's a tight end. He's a tight end. That's insane. He had 67 receptions combined his previous 3 years. So my dude balled out. You could call it a one hit wonder, if you will. And I know scouts are calling him slightly undersized. He's just a shade under 6'4", and 6'4" is sort of that threshold for tight ends. But 6 of his 12 games were over 100 yards, and his team was 3-9. So he was his team's only offense. He also had a 69-yard rush this year, which is crazy. I don't know many tight ends who have 69-yard rushes in their careers, and it went for a touchdown as well. So, I don't know if I mentioned this, but Isaiah Likely had 2 100-yard games this past year. Trey McBride had 6, and yes, I know it has to do with target share, but if Likely is going over Trey McBride this NFL draft, you better be darn sure that he's the better football player. And I just don't know what you've seen to think that he's the better football player, because he's definitely not a better blocker. And at Colorado State, the ball is going to him in the Mountain West, and you still couldn't stop him. So for my money, he's the first tight end off the board. And I think in non-Superflex leagues, I think he's a first-round pick for me, and I wouldn't be surprised if he caught maybe pick 30, 31 in the NFL draft, or say early to mid-second round. I would be highly disappointed if he wasn't the first tight end off the board.
And looking at his production, I don't necessarily see him with someone who he can only block or he can only be receiver. He can do very much both. And if we're just looking at how the NFL would value either skill set, we did just watch the Panthers give Ian Thomas, I believe it was $8 million guaranteed over the next couple of years. I don't know why necessarily, but he
just don't give him a dirt bike.
Yeah, or he will get 5 misdemeanors. But to think that there's those sorts of things where whether it's agreed upon or not, I think that he's someone who, if he were to slip, that just allows him to go to an even better and better team. And that would be incredible if he was going to go to an offense who, you mentioned that 60-plus yard run. It would be pretty incredible if he was able to be utilized as a tight end a bit all over the line there. And also in certain formations where he may be more considered the fullback. But with that frame, he's not too tall to where he wouldn't be able to generate leverage getting out of the backfield. But he's just so strong and athletic that he can do a little bit of everything. So I think he's
call him a Trey of all trades, if you will.
You could absolutely call him the Trey of all trades, and I really appreciate that. And that is possibly the best note to end on, with a nickname that neither of us thought of until just now. Although did you think that up earlier?
5 seconds ago.
I love it. Hey, 5 Second Jake. We don't call you that, but it could be a nickname if you want it.
Well,
bad implications, right?
I mean, you know what? If they do, I understand.
Absolutely.
I'll say that.
Well, Jake, I appreciate you coming on so we can talk a little, or give our prospect perspective. And I know we're looking forward to seeing the remainder of the combine. And soon enough, we will actually get on here and we'll get the roundtable together. And we will have a 1-round mock draft before the NFL draft. And we'll get to see where we start at now and where we end at after the actual NFL draft and how that changes. So I'm very much looking forward to doing that. And I appreciate you coming on. And I know you were a well-traveled man this week, but thank you for staying up a couple more minutes for me.
Bro, elated to be here. It's been a while. I love you, and I look forward to being on again with the whole crew.
Love you, brother. Appreciate you.